I've said before that there is no one size fits all leader or leadership style, but there are qualities or characteristics that all great leaders have in common. These qualities are what separate great leaders from merely good ones. So, for that reason, I've created an ongoing series that we're going to come back to over the next few months entitled The Ingredients That Make Up Great Leaders. We're going to take a look at what those qualities are. And I'm excited about it because it's going to be very practical. You're going to be able to look at that quality and then look inside yourself and go, okay, how can I develop this skill and become a more effective leader? So let's get started. The first quality is compassion. Now, I know many of you are thinking, I wouldn't necessarily start there. But in my opinion, compassion is foundational to effective leadership. And I would even go as far to say that great leaders have to have compassion. You cannot consider them great if they don't. The reason? Think about what we talked about in a previous session. We talked about how leadership is influence. If people don't know you care about them, it's going to be hard to influence them. John Maxwell says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. You see, effective leadership starts with compassion. Think about this. Let's say a friend of mine and I go to a coffee shop. At that coffee shop, I explain to him an issue that I'm having at work. Well, as we're talking, there's a businessman who's an expert in my field or industry. He overhears the conversation. At some point, he comes over, interrupts us, introduces himself, and then gives me advice. Guess what? It doesn't matter how good the advice is. I'm probably going to be polite, but I'm not going to listen to it. The reason? I don't have a relationship with him. But let's say after I get done talking with my friend says, hey, Shawn, can I share a few things with you? Even though my friend is not an expert in my business or industry, and even though that advice that the businessman gave me is probably better, I will probably listen to my friend because I have a relationship with him and I know he cares. Or think about another story. Let's say you take your kids to the park, and as they're playing, another parent comes down and sits beside you on the bench. After watching your kids for a little bit, that parent leans over and says, can I give you some parenting advice? Whoa, those are fighting words. People do not like it when you critique their parenting style. Why? Because you don't have compassion and a relationship with them. It's hard to have effective influence if you don't have a relationship with someone. Now, there are two keys to effective compassion. First, compassion is unconditional. People who exhibit true compassion are not swayed by the mistakes of others. Now, that doesn't mean you don't get frustrated or disappointed by those mistakes, and it also doesn't mean you're not condoning their actions, okay? People with compassion don't condone poor decisions, all right? But you know what they do? They create atmospheres within their teams or their families where people have the freedom to make mistakes, but then they learn from those mistakes. Okay? That's what people with compassion do. J. Oswald Sanders, in his book Spiritual Leadership, says, people who are impatient with weakness will be ineffective in leadership. He also says, blunders are the inevitable price that you must pay for training leaders. The great leaders know that they themselves and other people are going to make mistakes, and they plan and prepare for it, and they use those mistakes as learning opportunities. Second, compassion is confrontational. Now, I know many of you are thinking, how does that go together, confrontation and compassion? Well, think about this. Let's say I have a friend who is making poor choices. I'm not talking about little mistakes. I'm talking about he is making choices that is detrimental to himself and his family. If I stand on the sidelines and do nothing and say nothing, guess what? That's not love. That's hate. If I don't care about someone, then guess what? I'm going to let them self-destruct. But if I care about them, then I'm going to come alongside them. You see, the definition for confrontation is someone who stands in front or gets in the way. That's what true confrontation is through compassion. You are standing in front of someone. Think about someone taking a walk, and you get in front of them and you say you're making poor choices, and you do this out of love and gentleness, and the hope is they turn and go a different direction with their life. I had a situation years and years ago with an employee of mine who I thought was making a poor decision. We had a conversation. It was a difficult conversation. We didn't agree. In fact, we ended that conversation to agree to disagree. But then a year later, I got a letter from this employee. Here's a part of that letter. I want to read it to you. This employee says, "As this new year begins, I'm reminded of the mistake I made last year. I quickly and shamefully realized that I never apologized to you for what happened. I am so sorry for this mistake and for the inconvenience it caused you and your leadership team. I learned quite a bit last year, and I want you to know that I will never make that mistake again." Now, I'll be honest. This is the only time I've ever received a letter after confronting someone. But this is the goal of confrontation. The goal of confrontation is not to punish, it's to promote restoration, reconciliation, and growth. I know that not all confrontations are going to turn out that way. But if we do a good job with showing unconditional compassion, then our confrontation will be more effective. Correction is best received in the context of a relationship. So here's today's game plan. I got 2 takeaways for you. First, a few sessions ago, I asked you to create a list of people you want to influence, a list of people that you want to come alongside and help them develop and reach their potential. Look at that list again and think and ask yourself the question, do I care about them? Because if you don't care about them, or if they don't know you care about them, it's going to be difficult to influence them. Next session, we're going to talk about how to develop the skill of compassion. Second, I want you to look internally. And I want you to think about compassion being unconditional and confrontational. Which one do you lean towards? You see, what I found is that people will lean to one side of the pendulum or the other. You're either over here and you're really good at showing unconditional compassion and being gracious, but you struggle with confrontation. Or you're really good at being confrontational, but you struggle with being gracious and letting people know that you care about them. Figure out which side of the pendulum you lean towards. Maybe ask a few people around you. Then your goal is get closer to the middle. If you lean towards being unconditional with your compassion, you need to grow in being confrontational. If you lean towards being confrontational, you need to grow in unconditional compassion. That will help you be effective displaying both unconditional compassion, but also confrontational compassion. Let me leave you with our treatable lesson. It's difficult to lead someone without having a relationship with them.